Why do people who were traumatized as children have so many struggles connecting with other people? There is one big reason. Are you ready? It's because of people. They're triggering. There are so many people I love and I enjoy their time, but there are so many situations where being social feels like an obstacle course. I never quite know if I'm doing okay with other people, and even when I am doing okay, I'll come out of some get-together just filled with remorse. Like, what did I say? I vaguely think I said something wrong or I offended people, but I don't know, or I was too negative. And sure, I guess you could say, this is just ordinary insecurity, but the bottom line is, of course I'm sensitive because I'm alive and people are triggering. So my video today is the second in my series on isolation and loneliness. Being triggered by people is a huge reason why we isolate. The original video that I'm about to share with you was a huge success back in the pre-pandemic days. We had no idea what was coming, did we, when it came to isolation. And this video that eventually became part of my isolation course, which last year got replaced by my Connection Bootcamp. And if you're interested in that, you can check it out on my website at crappychildhoodfairy.com. Connection Bootcamp. But my channel was very small when I made this video, and yet this video attracted thousands of subscribers and taught me that not only is healing our people triggers important to this audience, but that I'm not the only one who struggles with it. So here's the original video I called Do People Trigger You? Last week, in the first video in my series on isolation, I talked about how common it is for people with CPTSD and childhood PTSD to experience being isolated and being lonely. And yeah, loneliness is part of life, at least a little bit for most people. But for people who experienced early trauma, it's like a curse many of us carry that touches everything in our lives and almost never gets talked about. So in this video, I'm going to keep talking about isolation, along with one of the biggest obstacles to healing it, and that's the fact that people are triggering for us. It's just true. Oh my gosh, people are intense. They're sometimes angry or annoying or dangerous, and they sometimes seem to be judging us or manipulating us, or sometimes they're just so cool and beautiful, they're intimidating. It doesn't take much with us. The dysregulation of CPTSD gets triggered, and we lose confidence in our ability to be in that moment without making a fool of ourselves or hurting someone. And those feelings can leave us with a powerful impulse to pull away and hide, to isolate. And we have 100 ways of doing that. Now remember, when we say isolation, we're talking about an unhealthy, sometimes involuntary lack of connection with other people, or a total lack of relationships. Some people isolate in a big, obvious way, but some of us are sort of secretly isolated, and we've developed an ability to withdraw from real connection even when we're in a crowded room, or part of a family that lives together, or even inside of a marriage. And it's hard to stop isolating, almost as if the isolation had a mind of its own and was trying to sabotage us every time we start to get close to people. It's kind of like an irrepressible urge to get away, to get safe and away from the person in front of us, sometimes by any means necessary. And it might look like we just drop them, or we might act angry and unreasonable so they want to drop us. And we're usually not consciously trying to do that. It's not really what we want, but then it happens so fast and we did it. It feels sometimes so impossible to control, like a burst of coughing is hard to control that we can suppress for a minute, but it has to come out eventually. And logically you think, I should be able to stop doing that, but it just keeps happening. So if you experienced neglect and abuse as a kid, you probably know what I'm talking about. People trigger you. When we're triggered, we say the wrong things, we get socially awkward, we might get too emotional, or just generally be too much for other people. So we've learned to control this triggered reaction by avoiding people, either by staying very peripheral and superficial, or by actually staying away from people. There's a certain common sense to this when you're in the early stages of healing and you have no other way to prevent a big rush of dysregulation from just hijacking your life. And you feel like you just can't go through that again. And so you keep your distance, you stay on the periphery of groups, you avoid opportunities that would require you to show up consistently, you struggle to genuinely commit to another person even when commitment is what you want more than anything.
And this kind of isolation can hollow out your life just as badly as living in a cave. Now, for some people, pets fill the gap. And thank God for the unconditional love of dogs and cats and pets. For a lot of hurt people, they are the first beings that they can let back into their lives. And some people are so hurt, that's all they can manage. But to live fully, we're going to have to connect with humans at some point, as flawed and cranky and pushy and needy and triggering as they sometimes are. So why are we so sensitive to people's normal ways? For one thing, we just didn't learn this stuff at home. When other kids were getting pep talks from their parents and being taught the nuances of interacting with people and what to do and what not to do and what everything means, we were more or less outside of all that, just completely on our own emotionally, making mistakes, saying the wrong thing, being mystified why we seem to have pushed people away. Ideally, we'd have learned how this all works earlier, but here we are in adulthood with an opportunity to learn it all right now. So the first thing to just accept is that being connected to people is going to involve some getting triggered. And it's worth learning to deal with that because in the long run, avoiding people will only make the problem bigger. And sooner or later, we want to get some control over the trigger mechanism without isolating, just so that we can tolerate being around people and maybe, just maybe, cultivate some true friendship or maybe even a romance. Now, the next thing is to learn to calm the triggers. And to do that, you need a way to notice and then lose the substance of that trigger, which is actually fear. When you're triggered, 1,000 fears are flooding your being, just overwhelming you. So the art to reducing triggers is to notice and lose each of those fears a little at a time as you slowly take steps to connect with more people. You interact a little, you get triggered a little, and then you deal directly with the fears that came up. And then pause. And then you do the cycle again. Interact a little, get triggered a little, and then deal with the fears. Now, some people seem to be able to just let go of fear, and I'm not like that. I can't actually lose fear at will, and that's why I use the writing technique you've probably heard me talk about. And if you want to try that, you may want to check out the free course of mine where I show you how to do it. Hundreds of my subscribers are finding it really helpful, and if you're one of those people, I invite you to share your experiences with others in the comments section below.
Loneliness is epidemic right now. But having trauma in your past is a multiplier for the problem of loneliness. Now, not all loneliness is bad loneliness. There's bad loneliness and there's good loneliness. And usually good loneliness is more what we would call solitude. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute, about how everybody's need to have some alone time needs to be, nourished, honored, made space for, but not to be confused with the bad kind of loneliness. So let's talk about the bad kind of loneliness first. Complex PTSD that may have happened from trauma in your childhood can change the way your brain is structured and the way it works. Now, don't worry, it can be healed. Your brain has some plasticity in this area, but that injury can really affect your ability to feel close to people, to feel like you belong in groups, and also your ability to attune to other people. And so it can make the way that you hear them is a little off because your attunement is off, and the way you respond to other people can be off for the same reason. And people sense that, and they think you're mad, or they think you don't care. But what's really going on is there has been a neurological change that hasn't been healed yet. All right. Another reason that people who are traumatized are so prone to loneliness is so often the reason we have complex PTSD is because we were raised by people who had major problems. They were very stressed, they were living in shame, maybe they had a lot of rage, they were poor, they had addictions, all that stuff going on that so often leads to a traumatic childhood. Also, really complicates social skills. So your parents can't teach you what they don't know, what they can't manage themselves. And so you may have felt as a kid like you were sort of feral, going out there trying to figure out how do you do social situations and having to completely write the memo yourself. All right. A third reason why loneliness is something that so especially affects traumatized people is that because of that trauma wound, people can be very triggering for us. Now, there may or may not be something they're doing, but we get triggered and the symptoms can become unmanageable. So you get dysregulated. Maybe you go to a party and you start to, you jam up. I can't speak. I don't know what to say. My heart's pounding. That can be dysregulation. You go into avoidance, you don't go to the party at all. Or you do covert avoidance, you go to the party, but you only are pretending to connect with people. You're putting on a total mask of sociability with people, and you're not actually having that connection. And some people go through their whole lives in covert avoidance, which is one of the harder ways to manifest complex PTSD, because when symptoms are subtle like that, even other people, they don't really know what it is. They, maybe a spouse just knows they don't really feel loved by you, but you're there, you're doing all the things, you got the roses on Valentine's Day, but it's not reaching another person's heart. That's covert avoidance. All right. Another reason is we get damaged perception. If you grew up with trauma, you probably were lied to a lot of times about what was going on. You're like, I'm scared. I feel like something bad's about to happen. Nothing bad is about to happen. Be quiet, stop it. Everything's fine. So you learn to just shut down and go, I guess it's just me. So that coping mechanism, it's good that you had that when you were a kid, because if you're 5 and you're being lied to, you're not in a position to stand up and determine the truth and go do your research and fight back. You just kind of have to go along. But then we grow up and it's time. It's time to start undoing that. You may have also inherited a broken red flag detector. And when you can't trust yourself to detect when somebody has bad motives or is manipulating you, you go in trusting, open-hearted, you get burned, and that happens enough times, and then you get hurt and you give up. And I see this a lot in the YouTube comments where people are like, I'm sick of it, people have just always been horrible to me, I'm not doing people anymore. And that's sad. I understand how they reach that conclusion. And I always hope for everybody that there's a softening of that, because it's a hard place to be. Also with trauma, we can be very socially awkward. We're not always aware. We are uncomfortable. We're anxious in social situations. And I don't mean everybody. I mean, nobody is identical, but this is a common pattern, to not be able to read the room. There's so much going on in here with the dysregulation and the worry. It's like, am I going to say the right thing? That you can't really tell. So if you've ever done that, where you walk into a room and you come in and you make a little joke and everybody just looks at you like, and maybe they were planning a funeral. So there's that perception damage and leads to social awkwardness where you cannot read the room. We also get prone to maladaptations that push people away. Sometimes that's a lot of anger, like unregulated anger, or we use blame as a weapon. And both anger and blame are part of the fight response, fight, flight, freeze, fawn. The flight response looks more like fantasy, addictions, limerence, just, avoid everything altogether, go watch TV. That's flying away from life, from people. The third one, shut down, follow along, wait for other people to change and include you. People please them, try to get them to like you. Those are the freeze and fawn responses. So our boundaries are wobbly. When you weren't taught boundaries and you weren't allowed to have them as a kid, they get, you don't really know, like, am I allowed to have this boundary? Or when you finally state the boundary, it comes out like really angry, like, no, don't do that. A lot of people when they're first healing are like that. And that's okay. You have to start somewhere, and it's better that you're setting boundaries at all and allowing them to be a little messy at first. But when you don't have any boundaries at all, it isolates you because it's the only thing you've got to protect that tendency to get dysregulated. All right, so let's talk about the cost of isolation, the personal experience of loneliness. I mean, that alone is just so painful. And I get, 100 letters a week, many, many letters. I get hundreds and hundreds of comments. They're from people who are feeling hopelessly lonely. They don't know what to do. They've tried things, but their trauma wounds are just putting enough of a little kind of divot in their ability to figure this out, to solve the problem, that they can't. They haven't yet. Now, this is what this channel is all about. It's about healing trauma wounds that cause this. There are some major manifestations of trauma, and one is that it was getting dysregulated and having your nervous system out of whack, which kind of, feeds everything else in trauma symptoms. But the second major area is disconnection from people, loneliness, choosing people who treat you badly, never getting loved or supported or never being safe with people. So that's disconnection. The third one is self-defeating behavior. And sometimes being lonely it begins with dysregulation, but it turns into a self-defeating behavior. So that's why it's so important. Like, being connected with people is so intrinsic to life, to healing. And not only do you need to heal in order to have connections, but you have to begin connecting with people in order to heal. Because I'm telling you, the trauma wound is relational. It happened through the way that you were connected or not connected with the first people in your life who were supposed to love you and deeply connect with you. And then it spreads out to your other relationships in the course of your life. So you can't go back to your childhood, can you? You can't go back. You probably can't change your parents. It's extremely unlikely, if they're alive even, that they're going to change on that. So the place where you start to heal is in your own capacity to re-regulate, reconnect, and change those self-defeating behaviors. And it's so important that you do that, because it's not just like your mental health and your happiness. There's a physical health cost to loneliness. When your immune system is compromised, there's a far higher rate of chronic disease. There's a far higher rate of autoimmune disorders. And then, of course, the mental health things like depression, anxiety. Everything depends on you learning to re-regulate and then work your way slowly, gently back into reconnection. So if you've been isolated and lonely for a long time, you may have developed rationalizations that keep you there. Rationalizations are protecting you from feeling, stressed that you have to do something about it, or ashamed that you haven't done something about it. But rationalizations don't serve you anymore. They're, anything that helps you survive what you went through, we bless it, we accept it, but then it's time to start packing it up. And so the rationalizations are in your way now. People often have rationalizations for the bad kind of loneliness, the bad kind that isolates you, that keeps you from contributing, that puts you in grave jeopardy of having a lack of support when you most need it, when you're hurt, when you're older, everything that happens in life. You deserve to be loved and supported. You may not have as much as you want right now, but you deserve it, and you can grow that. So these days, people believe it's not possible to connect. And I see this in the comments. People have these complaints like, nobody's any good anymore. All they ever do is small talk, or everybody's a narcissist, or, the world is so sexist. How could a woman ever have a job or a friend? And, I'm just here to kind of disrupt your thinking on that. Like, whatever the world may be with all the crap in it, there's also a lot of good in it, in all kinds of people. And if you believe that it's just like global, if it's black and white, it's all men, everybody's a narcissist, nobody wants a deep conversation, all Americans, I hear that one a lot. You're actually doing bad isolation. You're in a state where you're not seeing straight. There's a whole mix of people everywhere you go. So another rationalization is, I just need to be alone for a while and then I'll start reconnecting with other people. So that can be true for a period of time, but it very easily kind of over time turns into just like the prison that you're in. And you forgot to recalibrate and go, do I need more than 10 years of isolation to start reconnecting with people? You get rusty. And I think a lot of people during the pandemic experienced that. I remember when the lockdowns were ending and we were able to start hanging out with people more freely and not just like our bubble or, oh gosh, I'm so glad that's over. Every time I think about 2020, I just it's PTSD. Very traumatic. And there's so many bad things going on. And I'm still not over it, really. But one thing that I am recovering from is being rusty on connecting with people. So when I first started hanging out in groups or being in parties and stuff, I remember I was having trouble organizing my conversations, and they would become way too granular. Like people go, hey, how's it going? I go, oh yeah, good. It's really good to see you. What have you been up to? Oh, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, the pandemic really bad, right? And then all of a sudden my mind would wander to some very specific thing. Like I got these shoes, but they came late from Amazon and I'm not sure about the color. I would just my mind was rusty at how to focus on the overall conversation and the other person. And it would just go down these rabbit holes of lonely thoughts, of things you think when you're all by yourself, being at a party, thinking about an order you placed on Amazon 2 weeks ago. I was making up an example, but that's what it was like. I was always down in the weeds of my mind and not in my social self, attentive, listening, responding to what somebody's saying. And it's ultimately a very self-centered place. And there's a time when we need to be self-centered, and then a time when we need to come back out again. And so that's what happens with isolation is you lose even more attunement with other people. So your conversational skills are just blah. And then, of course, your emotional skills and the emotional attunement to other people, it just seems like, if you have a lot of fear, anxiety, resentment inside about how other people have treated you, it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. In isolation, I saw this happen a lot. I saw it in some family members. Often the more isolated they were, like especially the older people during the lockdown who were like really, really isolated, they just became so unreasonable. So, and they'd be watching TV, watching the news and not dealing with people. And their whole world was all this negative world portrayed to them on the news. And they became, unable to connect. And I say they, but I think everybody did it, including me. A lot of our interaction was coming off this TV. And honestly, I don't feel like the TV, I love entertainment on TV, but I don't think the way information is delivered is always in our best interest. It's not always fair. It's often, designed to get us worked up, angry, because anger brings us back. We click, we tune in, we watch, we buy. And I'm very disappointed in that. And I try to make this channel the opposite of that, where we get to process all that anger, come back to reality and start to see the nuance in the world, that not everybody is bad, not everything is evil. And when there is evil, I want very much for everybody to be alert to it so they can stop it. But you can't. When you start to think that everybody's bad and everything's bad, you're not able to do anything about things that are actually bad. You're basically kind of in your own world. And, I'm sorry if that's harsh or calling people out, but I speak from experience. I don't want to live in my own world like that. Definitely not if I'm going to be in my own world, I want the happy la-la one. But that's not good either. Either way, when you're in your own world, you end up isolated. So you don't want to have that. A lot of adaptations that we do for that bad kind of loneliness is just like staying in our heads where everything's analytical. Have you ever had you tell somebody, they go, "How are you doing?" And you go, "Well, I've just come through a really hard time and I had a health problem and I thought I might die for a minute there. And I was really worried and I'm just starting now to be able to, feed myself." And they go, "Oh, great. Well, you don't want to hear about me. They can't hear it. They're in their head. They're still thinking about what they want to say. They're not listening to you. They're not connecting with you. They're not hearing that you just had a hard time, so that they can't have empathy for the hard time or empathy for the fact that you're recovering. And if you can't do that, you are in a bubble. And if you can't do that also, it's like I said about the news bubble, is you become paranoid. There are many genuine threats in the world, but the thing is, when you're not talking to a variety of people and sort of getting a feel for, it's through connecting with other people that we stay grounded, that we're able to use our critical thinking skills to know when we're being lied to know when we need to do more research, to know when somebody is trustworthy. Like all of that is lost, first of all, by your trauma, then by isolation. Right? So to build that back, you got to heal your mind so that you can heal your perception. And to do that, you have to be in relation to other people. It takes proactive intention to heal this kind of trauma, because isolation and trauma wounds in general don't tend to heal by themselves. So everyone does need some alone time. Everyone. Good alone time, which we call solitude, is a lovely thing. And sometimes the CPTSD symptoms are such that you can't tolerate solitude, that you become so anxious in solitude that you'll rush out and hang out with people, even though they're not good for you, even though you're not actually interested in them, even though you're not connecting to them. And if you have CPTSD, that core wound is the dysregulation. And your healing always will first and foremost depend on you being able to recognize when you're dysregulated, because it's so disruptive to your ability to perceive and communicate and hang in there with things. You got to notice when you're doing it and then take measures to re-regulate. And I will put that down at the end of the video. I'll give you a link where you can download signs of dysregulation and emergency measures to re-regulate. This is a really helpful thing to know. You can like tuck it in your purse or your car and keep it with you everywhere so that when you get dysregulated, you can just pull over and come back and get all your senses online. It's so common with CPTSD, and you probably never got told about this before, but you're going to be amazed how powerful it is for you to be able to know that you're dysregulated. Now, a lot of re-regulation happens during alone time. Being able to stay regulated with people begins with being able to re-regulate all by yourself. That's the trick. That's the trick. It's not, you probably have quested to get other people to make you feel better. Like people say something, they say something dismissive or critical about you. You get all dysregulated. Then you go fix what you said. I can't feel better until you fix what you said. Well, this is a very unreliable way to get re-regulated, because if people aren't necessarily going to comply. But even if they will, even if you have the ultimate people pleaser person in your life to go, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to dysregulate you, I didn't realize that was going to happen. If they did that, you still wouldn't re-regulate. You're always going to have to know how to do this inside. The second thing is, once you know how to re-regulate, is you need to be able to recognize what makes connection challenging for you exactly. Is it that you feel awkward? Is it because you can learn social grace? I'm not kidding you, on YouTube. I have. First I learned on television, and when YouTube came out, I was all over the videos telling you, how do you handle this awkward situation? I love Charisma on Command that talks about how to handle it when people say something really crappy to you in the moment. I need to know that. Connection might be challenging for you because you feel ostracized, and you'd almost be an outlier if you didn't struggle with feeling ostracized. And this often happens because of our tendency to fit ourselves in with the wrong people, or because we can't really be ourselves, or we're living in a fog, that we end up with people who really don't fit us. You can't be yourself. You don't really have social permission from those people to be yourself, or you don't think you do. You don't have the inner power to express your opinions, to push back when somebody, is offensive to you in a graceful way that you feel good about. And so one of the things, if you're getting ostracized all the time, there's obviously two possibilities. And one is that you're doing something that's causing people to not want to hang out. And the other one is that it's a bad fit. And I do want to talk about the ostracization that I think we need a whole video or possibly a whole course about it. I've had that happen to me just so badly in my life. And one of the worst times was when I had young kids. I gotta tell you, I lived in a neighborhood at the time my kids were small, and I got divorced when they were quite young, which wasn't my choice. I do think it was for the best, but it's not like I ran away or anything. But the kid's dad left, and I had these kids, and I lived in a neighborhood that had a whole bunch of kids the same age. And when the kids were when they were first born, they were all born in the same year. And so a lot of times the moms and sometimes all the parents would hang out and have a mom's group. And I honestly, I know now, they were all they loved to drink wine in the middle of the day. I didn't. I was really, really focused on my 12-step recovery. I was really focused on my spiritual life. And I didn't really have that much in common, except we had kids. And I think for them, I don't know, it may have had something to do with the fact that I didn't drink, and they knew that I didn't drink. I do generally drink in my life, but I didn't drink during the many years when my kids were small or when I was pregnant. And that's just smart, right? And originally that started because I needed to quit smoking. And I'm just going to say a little aside about that. If you have CPTSD, it can be incredibly helpful to stop using intoxicating substances for as long as you need to get your bearings again. And there may come a day, if you don't have alcoholism or addiction, there may come a day when you can safely, participate with other people when they have a glass of wine. But as one friend said to me, you have no business doing that. When I couldn't self-regulate, alcohol was not my friend. It just made everything worse. So maybe I made too much of a fine point about no thanks, I don't drink, but I didn't mean to be on a high horse. I understood at the time it was because I had a difficulty with it. Things went along. This is a little story about the past, about one time, and this happened in high school, this kind of thing for a lot of us. But there I was in my 30s, and Halloween time came. The kids were all 2 or 3 or something. And there used to be this thing where we'd all take the kids out as a cohort down the street and go trick-or-treating. And then one year, they never invited me, and everybody, I saw them on the street. They didn't come to my door, but the 4 other families and their kids were there without us, and my kids were in their costumes waiting to join the group. And I couldn't let them do it. Like, we weren't invited. It was so weird. And so I contacted the parent who I trusted the most afterwards, and I said, what happened? Why are we not invited? What's going on? Oh, so-and-so, this one woman doesn't want you there. She doesn't want you there. And I said, why? What's going on? Well, you should talk to her. So I talked to her and I said, what's going on? This was very upsetting. My kids had nobody to trick or treat with. They waited. And, I'm sure you can feel this. It was just so awful. And she said, you can't be trusted with kids. And I was like, what do you mean? And it turned out she had had this resentment for, I don't know how long it had been then, months. It was based on something that wasn't true. And the only way I could straighten it out is by throwing her husband under the bus, actually. So, all right, will you bear with me while I go back? We used to carpool to the little preschool. We'd take turns driving each other's kids. But when I had a second kid, my whole back seat was taken up with 2 car seats, and I could not fit a third one in, and you're not supposed to put a seat in the front. So I said, I'm sorry, I can't drive your kid to the preschool anymore, because when I drive there, I have to have both my kids in the back seat. I can't fit another kid. And so a couple of times, the dad said, this is just an emergency, like my car is broken. Could I put my kid in the front seat of your car? Now, the kids at this point were 3.5 or 4, and they're old enough where you don't have to face them backwards. You can't, but you put the seat as far back as it goes, and you can do it. It's legal, and it's just not a great idea, but it's legal. And I said, okay, yeah, all right, we'll do that. I'll get your kid to school. So he put his kids in. We did that 2 or 3 times. Well, apparently the mom found out. The dad said that I had just done it with no permission. And then this whole reputation for me as somebody who couldn't be trusted with kids went around. Now, to be fair, I had personal problems that you could have criticized in my life, but the fact that I gave that kid a ride upon request reluctantly was not one of them. But it went down in history, and there was gossip about me. The whole neighborhood, it was this long cul-de-sac. And next thing you know, this rumor mill was spreading, and they said, oh, she can't take care of pets either. And they said she's had 4 cats and she killed them all. And it's like, I didn't have 4 cats. I had 1 cat. And when it was 15, it died of feline leukemia. It was very sad. And then I got a kitten, and I still have that cat who's 12. And all of this, it was just like this crazy ostracization rumor mill. And it got ratcheted up and up and up. And to this day, I can't tell you what really happened. At the time, these rumors would circulate, and eventually they'd get back to me. They would say, just all kinds of things that were made up about me. It was like the mean girls in high school, but everybody in their 30s and even 40s. And I just closed up shop, and I left that neighborhood, and I never went back. It's a horrible memory. I lived there 14 years. And the ostracization was wicked and cruel. And here's why I think it happened on the meta level, is I was really isolated up there. I was not with my people. I had just gotten divorced because my marriage was so difficult. I was ashamed of what was going on. I didn't have genuine connections with people, and I was starved for actual support from people who cared and understood. And they were not my neighbors. They were not them. Those were the years when some of you have heard, I had 14 major surgeries. I didn't have help. One neighbor, one time brought a meal over, and I'm very grateful for that. But it was 4 years. It was in my face all the time, the ostracization. And so this is what I want to say. Is everything bad, everything misattuned, everything that was a mistake in my life? I can't think of an exception. I did because I was lonely. And this is my pitch to you. Why it's so important to start coming out of that isolation and work on it, even if you think people are terrible and it's not worth it. When you can begin to put your connection to other people back together, you will start to have a new experience. There really are okay people out there, and you're going to have to find them, and you're also going to have to work on yourself a lot because you're rusty. You get rusty. And as you begin to do that, slowly and surely, I have a course for that. It's called Connection Boot Camp. It's like a 30-day program with a video and a worksheet each day. And lots of people have used that to sort of walk themselves back out into society very gently, one little step at a time. You can check that out. That link is always down below in the description section. But why it's so important to do that is to have the full spectrum of your life. You are still going to need solitude. You're still going to need the good kind of alone time so that you can re-regulate, so that you can process your thoughts, so that you can just take it easy sometimes. One thing I love about solitude times, you can create like a little solitude retreat, and I do that sometimes. I go out of town by myself, or I take a day by myself and I go on a gorgeous hike. Just take myself out there, and alone with my thoughts, I can think of things, I can feel things, I can observe the beauty in things 50% more than I can with other people around, and 100% more with other people around who are stressful for me to be around. So it's a project. It's a project to start taking yourself out that front door and connecting with people gradually and surely. So giving yourself those solitude breaks is very important to being able to reconnect. You also need tools so that you can recognize the maladaptive coping mechanisms that you've got going on. Nobody sees their coping mechanisms at first. Are you blaming other people for your isolation? Are you lashing out at them? Are you fawning on cruel friends who you don't fit with, who tend to exclude you already? Like, come on, I need your validation. I want to hang out. Like, we don't want those people. We want the good ones. And that might take a little bit of work for you. Are you willing to work on healing your isolation, to own your healing, to own your mistakes, to be courageous in putting yourself out there? Because that's a lot of it. Like, I grew up in the 60s and early 70s in Berkeley, and it was the era of grown-ups, finding themselves, right? And, they believed at that time, some of the grown-ups, oh yeah, I'm perfectly great as I am, and anything that I don't like, I can just get rid of. That's not always true. Sometimes we are the problem. Sometimes we have difficulties that are straining relationships, and so that's why I say self-awareness is so important. We notice ourselves. We take stock every day, like, how am I doing? Was I fair to people? Was I honest? Did I get over the top with anybody? Do I need to apologize? Is there anybody I need to stay away from? And to do that, you also need a sounding board. You need people. You need a little bit of support to work on that. And I can't say enough about the value of 12-step fellowships, where you can meet other people who are also walking the path of healing. The great thing about them is they're not perfect either. So you don't have to worry that, that everybody's better than you. Everybody's struggling, and you will be disappointed sometimes in the way that people are imperfect. But they're walking this path with you, and it's a place where everybody keeps bringing their focus. And it's incredibly valuable to be in a group of people and hearing how they're kind of doing their struggles, and how this person's solving things, and how this person's sort of getting into hot water with the group. You learn a lot just from being in that environment, and it's free. I think you put a couple dollars in the basket, which and if you have it, you don't even have to. All right. And are you honest with yourself about your alone time? Is your alone time actually what you want? Have you become like too proud of it? Like, I'm independent. I don't need anybody. When I'm telling you that I don't need you and I don't need anybody, I'm in an emotional flashback. That's a feeling that I think I first had when I was 3. I don't need you. I don't need anybody. And it comes back and haunts me sometimes and drives me into some of my meanest, yuckiest, stressiest behavior. So if you're able to examine your self-defeating beliefs, your attitudes, your behaviors, your justifications for isolating, if you're able to look at those honestly, you can pick one and start working on it. Are you aware of your own boundaries? Do you know how to communicate your boundaries? Probably not. Hardly anybody does at first. And this is a big reason why we end up isolating. And there's some really good resources on boundaries. I've got some videos for you on that. That's a big piece of the Connection Bootcamp I mentioned before that you'll find in the description. When you trust yourself to let go of people and situations, that's what a boundary is. It's where you step back or say no because they're not fitting what you do need. When you trust yourself to let go of people that don't work with your boundaries, you can say yes. You can, when you know that you can say no later, or you can remove yourself later, you're freer to accept an invitation. You're freer to attend the dinner party or go on the date and know that you can deal with what comes. All right. Do you have tools to comfort yourself, to learn to see what went wrong when things do go wrong? And for that, we use the daily practice around here. The daily practice is a set of 2 techniques, writing and meditation. The writing is a very specific format. If you want to learn it, I have a free course. I'm always linking it down in the description section, and hundreds of thousands of people have taken this course. And it's my pleasure to hear back from so many people who have been able to calm their symptoms with it and get clear, because you're going to be naming the fearful, anxious, resentful, angry thoughts that you have. You don't have to disavow them. You just name them, write them down. You ask for them to be removed off your mind, or you release them, and then you rest your mind in meditation and it recomposes. Now, I just gave you that summary. I really encourage you, don't just try to take that and run with it. It's a very specific technique, and if you don't do it right, it can end up making you feel worse, and I don't want that to happen to you. It's a free technique. Go check it out in the link. All you have to do is sign up. You can learn and try the techniques in less than an hour. And if you take that course, you'll be invited to come to twice monthly daily practice calls with me. I'm there live. We use the techniques together, and I take questions. And I love my daily practice calls. This is the great joy of my life. So, one more question I have for you. Are you willing to keep up the good work and persevere and not give up? I know that you'll be tired. I know that your feelings will be hurt, but this is what it takes, is perseverance. You are meant to be fully yourself. You need to be fulfilled in your life. You need to be loved, and you need to be included. Every person deserves that. Pushing people away so that you can be alone is incredibly common with people who grew up with childhood trauma. And it feels like it's the right, best, most self-caring thing you can do sometimes when you're under stress, when you're feeling triggered. And let's just all admit it, for people with CPTSD, hanging out around people is full of triggers. It's like a crocodile pit. It's a black hole, and it feels so good sometimes to just draw the line, to pull back from everybody and to make an excuse or cancel a plan or end a relationship just so that you can get a little breathing room. But here's the thing. If you keep using isolation to manage your CPTSD triggers, just about every option in your life will gradually close off to you. Now, participating with people is just part of living our lives. And maybe you're good at tolerating your loneliness. You know, I get letters from people like that all the time. But you know what? I don't want you to be good at loneliness. It's better to be uncomfortable with it, to be sad about the relationships that are lost or blocked for you because of your trauma. It is sad. And that grief and that discomfort with being alone is what is going to push you back into connection with people. And this time, if you can learn to heal those triggers that make dealing with people so difficult, you can start to connect with them one little step at a time. And I'll come back to explain how to do that in a minute. But first, let's talk about why pushing everyone away feels so freeing and peaceful at first. Let's just get that out on the table. All right. First, isolating yourself is an instant solution to the stress you feel when your CPTSD symptoms are triggered by something, an argument, a mistake, something embarrassing. You feel rejected or judged or ugly, or you gained weight, or you feel frazzled. It's a way that you can shut the door on all those unpleasant feelings for a while. Second, once you get triggered and that really kicks in, your emotions rise up, your mind starts distorting things. You feel overwhelmed. And honestly, when you get that dysregulated, it can take days to bounce back and feel like yourself. There's a huge temptation to just avoid the triggers altogether, or to use what I call covert avoidance. And those are strategies that you can keep looking good, like you're connecting with everybody, but you're just keeping your relationships as hollow as possible. You're not showing up for people. You might not be conscious, but you're like avoiding commitments, canceling plans, not really being present with them when you're hanging out with them. This is really common for people with CPTSD. Putting yourself out there when you're a covert avoider, it just feels like it's going to be exhausting, right? It feels like it's going to be just like a marathon that never ends. So you avoid. It's very tempting. And by the way, if you feel that childhood trauma has affected your ability to connect and feel comfortable with people, I have a quiz that you can take to check if you have the common symptoms of that. There's a link to that download right down in the description section below this video. It's called the Connection Quiz, and you might want to check that out. All right. The third reason why isolating is so tempting is that social situations stress you out, and it's just so easy to cancel. If you're a little bit avoidant, I'll bet that you've told every story in the book to get out of plans. Just tell them you're sick, tell them you have to work, and they say, okay. And it's just such a relief, right? Now you don't have to deal with all those people. And it feels really good at first. It feels empowering to have that control over your time, even though you kind of got it dishonestly. It feels good to give yourself that space. Probably you were very hungry to have a little space and a little control over your time. But it's come to this where you're isolating in order to get it. So the fourth way that isolating can be so tempting is what's happening when you're avoiding everything is you're telling yourself that this is only temporary. You just need a rest. You just don't like this one person. You just need a little bit of self-care time. And in fact, it feels like self-care, doesn't it? It's like a little spa for one with Netflix and DoorDash. Feels like you're doing something good for yourself, but really, how does it feel? How does it feel after you've done it a couple days in a row or a couple weeks or a couple years? If you do it enough times, there's a dread feeling that is really hard to push down. I know I've done it. It tends to come up and haunt me about 3 in the morning and I can't sleep. I just feel like life is passing you by. And it'll start to get more stressful not having real relationships in your life than it is having them. So when you're promising yourself that soon you'll get back out there, just remember, the longer you aren't out there, the harder that gets. And sometimes the isolation will cause you to go deeper into behaviors that trigger the urge to isolate. So it can be kind of a downward spiral. It can begin to feel like an addiction where you even feel drawn to experiences of overwhelm or exhaustion, because then you can give yourself permission to keep isolating. That's when you know you're in a bad spot. Okay, so let's talk about why it's so important to fight that urge to isolate, to come out of loneliness, even when it's hard. And the first reason is you need people in your life. I know you know that, but I'm just going to say it out loud. You need people in your life. Even if you didn't have emotional needs for people, your immune system needs to be around people. Your mental health needs to experience people. Your physical health needs to be around people. And when you're actually connecting with people, it has this really healthy effect of just kind of soaking up self-absorption. Self-absorption is what fills up all that space where your friends belong, right? It ends up being this big focus, like, how do I feel? What's going on? What's about to happen? And you get out there with people and your attention comes off of that and you start to have a more balanced view, all right? Being with people helps to keep your thinking grounded. And I would just like to point out, some people have felt a little hurt when I say this, but if you've ever known people who aren't into people and they're like hiding out and they're avoiding people, maybe when you were younger, you saw people who had been doing it for years and they were older. Being a hermit actually makes people start to act weird. And I know you know it's true. And what it comes from is there's just a total lack of socialization there. Our fears can get the better of us. Our sort of biased thinking can sort of just keep escalating and escalating when there's nobody there to push back on you or give you a reality check. And so, yeah, we get weird. We also need to be around people, not just so that we can act like not weird, but so that we can be useful to people. I believe strongly that our happiness, it's not just a feeling. It's something that is really, really developed as we grow into being our real selves and becoming useful to other people, being of service to them, helping them out a little bit. Not like being codependent, not doing too much, but being connected enough that you can show up for people. You can attend community meetings. You can check on a neighbor. You can run an errand for somebody. You can take a phone call from somebody who's sad. Those are facets of showing up that are actually really good, not just for the other person, but for you. You need to be playing this role for your continued development, or it traps you. It's like a developmental barrier. You can't mature if you're not having those interactions with people. Also, speaking of maturing, it's so important to have people who are caring for you. If you're sick, if you have an injury, you need to be cared for. And In this past couple of years, 2020, 2021, we've seen the example of people who ended up isolated and didn't have those relationships in place and there was nobody to care for them. And it's one of the saddest things there is. This is a good time to make a commitment. Just say, I'm going to do my best to be connected to people so that when the time comes that I have to be isolated or I'm in the hospital, that I have people to support me. And one way you can do that is you can be that person for others. A most important reason that you need to be connected to others is that you have gifts to bring to the world. And the gifts are not the same as talents. Talents are things you're good at. Gifts are things that you have that have been bestowed on you for the benefit of others. And if you don't have others in your life, you can't use your gifts. I spent years not using my gifts. I felt empty and hollow and had this constant feeling that I was missing out on life. And when I began to get busy and get into action, when I started doing Crappy Childhood Fairy, it started as a blog. I started writing blog posts and I shared it, and I think 2 people saw it, and I sent emails to everybody I knew. A couple people saw it, but it began to engage me in the process of doing something for the benefit of others. And it lifted me up so much that I had the focus and the energy to write a second blog article and another one, and then here we are, 5 years later. Here we are together. It's the greatest joy of my life. We need other people so that we can flourish and so that we can become ourselves. Now, it might not feel possible to you right now to step out of your comfort zone, whether that is deep isolation or something that you're doing that's a little more covert, where you're out there with people but just avoiding real connection in your life. But that feeling of difficulty is exactly why now is a good time to fight the urge to isolate. What you can do instead of isolating in order to protect your triggers is you can learn to calm those triggers, and then you won't need to isolate. If you can start to get mastery over those triggers and the dysregulation that results, which is totally normal for people who grew up with abuse and neglect. If you're new to this channel, we talk a lot about that here. Dysregulation. It's a neurological state where we get overreactive and anxious and discombobulated. It's not a good way to live your life. When you learn to calm your triggers, dysregulation doesn't kick off. Neither does that disconnection from people. Neither does the self-defeating behavior that has been dogging you all your life, whether that's an addiction or an attraction to people who treat you badly or an inability to care for yourself. There are a number of ways that we fall into self-defeating behavior. And that's what happens. There's the original trauma, not your fault. Then there's the triggers, the dysregulation, the disconnection, and the self-defeating behavior. And when you're healing, once you can heal those triggers and dysregulation, you are now on a level playing field where you can start to deal with the self-defeating behaviors. Everybody has some. We're all works in progress right now. It feels good to start facing one of them that's been giving you trouble, and you can get going on that. So learning to calm your triggers, that's the skill that will set you free. The first few years of your life are not even in your memory, and that's true for everyone. But if you were neglected or abandoned during that time, it can influence your brain development in ways no one can see by you or anyone. And so you may have grown up blaming yourself, feeling like you're doing something wrong because you have classic signs of trauma during infancy. And one example of where this kind of trauma can begin is in children who are adopted. Now, even when they're adopted by loving parents, there can be an injury to development with a common pattern of symptoms. Things like struggling to know who you are, what your needs and preferences are, and what you actually want in life. Not everybody who's adopted has those, but that is one pattern. And you can be left with as well a chronic sense of insecurity, which is totally understandable. When it's coupled with that diminished sense of identity, it can make you susceptible to other people's agendas. Rather than strike out on your own path, you might find it easier to go where you're told, or to mimic the choices of the people, who are in your space or who you depend on. So my letter today is from a woman I'll call Kathy, and she writes, "Good morning. I'm 64 years in age and still feel like I've never reached adulthood or grown up. I've rarely felt deeply, honestly happy my entire life, although I think I pulled off pretending all was normal or okay most of my life. I wasn't abused. Here's the backstory, although for me, I will never truly know if I was lied to or given half-truths. I was raised by an older single mom. Her story to me, from the earliest memories, was that I was adopted in 1957. My mom was 46 at the time. It's mom in quotes, her adoptive mom, was 46 at the time. She was a luncheonette manager in a five and dime store in a strip mall. Her account was that a customer of hers found herself pregnant and asked my mom for a loan to get an abortion. My mom, who had no children and was a widow, said, "I won't loan you the money for an abortion, but if you don't want the baby, I will take it and raise it." And that's what happened. Supposedly, I was handed off in a local hotel or motel. Single women in 1957 and over the age of 37 could not adopt. She was 46 years old. I somehow instinctively knew as a young child and throughout my school years that something was off with that story. On top of that, although I was extremely good in school and very active in activities and had friends, I always felt different than everyone else. I was keenly aware that everyone had dads, and I had no explanation for why I did not. My mom, whom I knew loved me but was not affectionate either physically or verbally, was too old and too tired to participate in my life. She was either at work or at home. She provided for me, and I knew she loved me, but still. Fast forward, I grew up a very compliant, obedient child. I was told I already had a full-time job lined up for me before I even graduated from high school. College, no one even talked to me about going to college. At this prearranged full-time office job, I met a 25-year-old man. I was 17. He was married. Once he got divorced, my mom said, "Marry him or never see him again." She found out we had been intimate. I didn't want to, nor was I looking to get married, and I wasn't in love. But guess what? We married. I was never happy. When we went to get a marriage license, they couldn't find anyone with my name and date of birth, but they did find me with a different last name and different parents. I was crying, upset, and asked my mom for the explanation, which I never got. She told me my biological mom was no good and that she didn't know who my dad was. My whole life, I've never felt like I belong, like I'm valued or important. I always take a back seat, and my concerns are never as important as someone else's. I've now been divorced twice. As an only child, I don't typically feel lonely. I can be alone, but I do long for a significant love in my life again. I stumbled on your YouTube videos and can so relate. I've never known what I want to be or wanted to be, or how to be happy. I've turned into an anxious, depressed, scared woman since my last breakup about 7 years ago. I just can't find out who I am, who I was meant to be, and how to have a fulfilling life on my own. I work at a job where I'm a valued employee, but am unhappy, as it's not a job I would have ever wanted. I never learned how to find out what makes me happy and then go after it. I'm just getting older. All I do is work 40 hours, sometimes more, and stay home, afraid of interaction. While my health is still good, I want to learn how to enjoy my life. I never keep friends long term. I don't know why. I've had one best friend in the last 25 years, someone I could tell everything to and never feel judged. And she and I were opposites, go figure. But she died unexpectedly about 12 years ago. I'm scared I will just keep going downhill and never learn how to live a fulfilling life. Of course I have more, but I know this should be short. Oh, please give me some insight. Thank you so much. And that is from Kathy. Thank you, Kathy. I think I can help. All right, let's go through what you told me. So first of all, yes, I wasn't adopted, but I've known people who were, and what you're describing sounds really in line with what it can feel like to have been separated from a birth mom early on. I think your story is really fascinating, the details, and I have a theory about this, for what it's worth. So your adoptive mom lied to you, but she was 46 and she worked at a luncheon counter at a five and dime, a luncheonette manager at a five and dime in 1957 when you were born. And there is something so colorful, really, about that. This is really evocative. It almost seems like you're describing a movie about an amazing, heroic woman who came into the world the hard way. And It's not like other people. So there's that. And in that, you have something in common with me and so many people here, that our homes were not like other people. And your mom was already 46 and she was too old to do the normal mom stuff. And especially if you were born in the 50s, it was common for moms to be quite young then. So they would have been running around with tons of kids and doing things. And I could sure see how, as an only child, you felt left out of that. You were a good student. You were active in activities. Good. And you had friends, but you felt different than everyone else. And I think a lot of us here relate to that, but for different reasons. So you were aware everybody had dads, and you didn't have an explanation for why you didn't. So I'm not sure how old you were when you found out that you were adopted, or that the original story, this thing where you were handed off in a motel room, it sounds plausible, but it's so colorful. It's so cinematic and both sad and promising, that you're a person with a lot of depth, that you're a person who has been through things, that people came through. This character of your mother, the luncheonette manager, who wasn't very affectionate, but was solid and provided the upbringing. There's something that appeals to me about your upbringing as beautiful in its way, and has a quality to it that is worth valuing. It's worth valuing. You are not nobody. You're different from the vanilla standard, but I didn't come from that either. But I do know who my dad was. Then what happened here when you got older, this thing where she lined up a job for you before you had graduated from high school. So I was trying to understand, who does that? And I'm just guessing. She's from an earlier generation. I calculated. When was she born? 1912 she was born. So when she was 17, it was 1929. And back then, a girl, I don't know, if she was just trying to project on you what she needed to do, you just get a job. College wasn't what girls did all the time, certainly not when their mom was a luncheonette manager. People would have had to have money, especially to send a girl to college. So I'm not trying to make excuses for the ways that you were neglected, but I just think I was trying to understand, why was a girl who was good at school, why was she just thrust into this job? And I think that's part of it, is that, and this is not uncommon for adopted people, for adopted kids, is that your sense of identity, I don't know what happens when we're little, but apparently that identity is kind of transferred to us. Natural parents and the feeling that they have about their children, somehow they're transferring something to us where we get a sense of who we are, get a sense of our worth and what we're destined for. Now, God knows, for people who are neglected or abandoned as kids, it doesn't always just happen like that. And we put it together later. That's what we do. We put it together later. Or sometimes we temporarily get it from being part of some scene or something. But later, what everybody's about I'm 59, you're 64. At this stage of life, it's starting to be pretty real. Wait a minute, I can't be somebody I'm not anymore. That would be silly. And I'm so proud of you that you're feeling that pain and that absence, and it's compelling you to go forward. After you were compliant, you went along, you did the job, you married the guy, you did what your mom wanted, and your whole life you didn't feel like you belonged, you didn't feel like you were valued or important. And that really sounds like a trauma wound from when you were little. But you know what? You are important, and you do belong, and you're one of us, and you belong here, and we treasure you. And I would just like to invite everybody in the commenting community to please just let Kathy know. Just please communicate to her belongingness, and invite her to come in and be part of this, And if you want to take another step, we have the membership community, which is a place I love. And there's a Facebook group there where people talk to each other, and it's a lot more personal. And there's daily practice calls every day where people can connect. It's even more than YouTube. So you've been divorced twice, you're on your own, you're pretty good at being alone, but you would like to find love again. You're only 64. So here's what I want to encourage you to do. I just, you're free now. You're free now. There's no husband, there's no mom, there's nobody with expectations of what you're supposed to be. So this is how we find out what we really love. We just start to experiment with what we think it might be. And I was given a lot of guidance on this when I was 45. through people I met through my now husband. And it was kind of radical for me because I think it's not uncommon that we all, like the necessity of having to earn money or the necessity of living life in such a way to support kids that, came at a funny time or anything like that. We don't all just like live our lives completely self-actualized all the time. We're improvising, we're doing things. But life presents an opportunity right now, and I just see a big field in front of you, is for you to like experiment with what you think it might be. And so I don't know you, and you haven't put anything forward yet, but some of the things that people discover at this age are things in the creative arts. It's music, it's painting, it's needlework. Some people do physical things. They start learning to do yoga or Tai Chi, or they take up running even. I still want to get back to that. Not doing it right now, but it's, taking care of your body is a really good thing to do. And it can become a way to connect with other people and to bring joy into your life and start moving things forward. Movement is so important. It's so important to trauma healing and to start, opening things up. Some people get into spiritual pursuits, finally pursuing a faith or going back to an original faith or leaving a faith or learning meditation. The daily practice that we do is both a spiritual and practical practice. People bring to it whatever it is they believe. So we have this really dynamic community here that does that. You'd be so welcome to join us. And you access that through the membership, or going to school and taking classes, or cooking, or dating. And I'm talking about all these things that are sort of for fun and recreation, but then there's all the things with volunteering. You could work with adopted kids, foster kids. There's so many ways to get involved. And probably I'm going to anticipate that if you've had trouble knowing what you're into, you have a little bit of anxiety about getting involved in something, like maybe you'll feel stuck. I think that's common. I don't know if that's true for you, but there's a way that you can try things out just in little bits and just keep noticing, where does the joy come up for you? The question you're really looking for is, where do you start getting feedback that you made a difference in people's lives? And it sounds like your life doesn't have that right now. And I'm telling you, Kathy, nobody's happy until they find that thing. It's not always the job we do for money, but we all have some kind of a gift that we can use that benefits other people. And we cast about for what that is, first of all, by, what evidence is there that I have been useful to people? And that's evidenced by, they tell you, when you did this thing, it really helped me. So I talk a lot about that. That's something that really changed my life when I did some work to find out what my gifts were. And the first piece of information I had was that when I tell my story, it has a positive effect on people. And I was like, well, I guess I should find a way to do that. So I thought it would be a blog. It grew into these videos. So I'm telling my story, and all these people come and watch. And that's how, and it just gives me tremendous joy because I'm doing the thing that I do. I'm doing the unique Anna thing. There's a Kathy thing for you. Whatever that is, it could be a lot of different things. It's not all artistic or, saving the children. There's so many ways that people do it. They do it by creating order. They do it by creating beauty. They do it by creating a safe space for other people or a relaxing space for other people. You can find your right place and the thing that gives you joy and brings purpose to your life through experimentation, one little step at a time. The first step is you just commit. I'm going to do one thing towards this. And we all have to start where we are and just go, I don't know, it might be something like this. And just be willing, to take 100 steps in 100 days and let most of them be kind of false starts, or no, not that. But one thing leads to another. So you end up going and checking out this one thing, and then you meet somebody who says, I know of this opportunity to do this, and you do that. And through that, you meet this other thing. And next thing you know, you're finding your feet, you're finding your joy, and you're finding friends, which is a very nice thing to have. 2 or 3 friends in life is such a positive thing to have. People who, like the friend who died that you had, where you could tell them everything. It's not too late, and it's not too late to find love, Kathy. So persevere, please persevere, and support yourself to be able to persevere by being able to deal with the fearful and resentful thoughts that come up. That's why we do the daily practice, because when we start putting our neck out there and living life, stuff comes up, it starts to get emotional. We feel discouraged. We want to withdraw. And the daily practice is a way to just keep moving that out, just getting it out of your head onto the paper. And then, you carry on. You just carry on. It's so much easier when there's somewhere for that to go.